This assignment will give us a lot of experience with event handlers. We've already used some event handlers in this class. In this assignment, we're going to have quite a few event handlers in the first part, and then in the second part, we are going to learn how to reduce the number of event handlers that we need. So in this assignment, we're going to use the session object and create a few session variables. We will use the convert class because we'll be performing 4 basic mathematical operations, and we will be converting text into integers so that we can perform those operations. You've seen object sender in your event handlers already, and in this assignment we are going to use sender when it is passed in. We'll do that in part 2. So the first part is creating the assignment with all of the buttons, and we will create an event handler for each and every button. And then part 2 is showing how we can really condense that back end part into much fewer event handlers so that we have multiple buttons pointing at the same event handler. So use of object senders, very important, and understanding what you can do with it. For this assignment, I chose to set it up as a calculator. I wouldn't call it a calculator. In fact, while it does calculations, the reason I chose this is because I can have 16 buttons on the screen, and we can go from having 16 event handlers in the back end to condensing that down to just a few. So instead of having 10 event handlers for the numbers 0 through 9, we condense that down to just 1 event handler. And instead of having 4 event handlers for add, subtract, multiply, and divide, we condense that down to just 1 event handler. And then we have a separate one for equals and a separate one for clear. What we are focusing on is event handlers and using object sender, learning about casting. So we're not developing any more difficult style of calculator than a single digit calculator. So for this, each time we use it, we will do a single digit plus, minus, multiply, divide, one of those, and then another single digit, and then equals, and then hit the clear button. Again, it's not about the calculator. So if you think it's about the calculator, you're missing the entire purpose of the assignment. So pay attention to the event handlers, pay attention to object sender when it's passed in. We'll utilize session in this. You can go ahead and look at a working solution. So this is hosted on our web server. We can go back and forth between the two versions here. They look identical, but the back end is different. Our basic functionality is just single digit operation, single digit equals, clear that off, single digit operation, single digit, clear that off. And that is basically it. We come to the second version, version 2. You'll see that it loads up here as version 2. And again, we can perform the same things. So that's our finished version. Each time we click one of these buttons, it is going to an event handler. So on version 1, we have an event handler for each one of these. On version 2, all of these numbers go to the same event handler. All of these 4 operations go to the same event handler. And then we have a clear and we have an equal event handler. So there's the finished solution you can look at. On the previous assignment, I posted a couple of short videos about using the Visual Studio Debugger. Please look at those so that you can debug your own assignments and find your own errors. And there's some additional information about the assignment here. So we are going to go ahead and move into Visual Studio. So from Visual Studio, I'm going to do a File, New, Project. I'm going to make sure that I choose ASP.NET Web Application in C#. There's my language C#. Make sure that I choose ASP.NET Web Application down here. I'll hit Next. Again, I like to store mine on the desktop until I'm actually ready to put it on the server. So I'm going to call this Assign03. I don't think I have that folder name on my desktop yet. The default .NET framework that came up for me is 4.6.2, so that's what I'm going to leave it at, 4.6.2. I'm going to start with an empty application. Let this create it. And there we have our assignment 3 solution showing up. First thing I'm going to do is right click on assignment 3, add new item. I'm going to make sure that I'm under C# web forms, add a new web form. We're going to call this one calc1, calc1.aspx. I'll hit add. There's my .aspx and the associated .cs behind it. And we're going to spend a good little while in the .aspx to start. So I'm just going to have that ASPX open here, and we're going to lay out the controls that we're going to be using. We're going to start by giving this div an ID of container. And then I'm going to come up into my head tag. I'm going to start a, that's what I wanted. I'm going to start some styles up here, and I'm going to do pound container. And for the container, I'm going to set the width to be 700 pixels, the height to be 700 pixels. I'm going to give it a border radius of 50 pixels and set the background color to be 99FFFF, so just a shade of blue. I'm going to come down here and go to split screen so we can see that we've got our rectangle down here at the bottom with our container inside of it. Inside of our container, we're going to put another div. So I'm going to spread these out a little bit because everything's going to go inside of there. I'm going to put another div, this one with an ID of label background. So there's my open and close div. And then I'm going to set, again, some styles for label background. The label background will be width of 700. Height of 90. I'll do a position of relative. Set the top to 0 pixels and the left to 0 pixels. Change the background color to be a gray. Set the border top radius, top right radius to be 50 pixels, and again the top left. And come down here. So there's my container up here at the top. Inside of that, we're going to drop a label. So we are going to grab a label and we're going to drop it inside of that div. I'm going to leave the ID, that's fine. The text I'm going to change to be single digit calculator v1. Keeping that on the screen, we'll do a pound label 1. We'll set the position of that one to be absolute. Set the left to be 100 pixels. Top to be 20 pixels. Width to be 450 pixels. And we'll set the font size to be 32 point. Click down in here, and there's my heading that we'll have on both of these. So now we've got that initial part there. Let's go ahead and put our hyperlink up here in the corner. So for that, I'm going to come over here and grab a hyperlink, drop it on the screen. I'm going to make it point to calc2.aspx. Now that is just the text that displays, that's not the actual navigation. Inside of that opening hyperlink, I'm going to do a navigate URL equals calc2.aspx. That is the equivalent of your href. So that is what will perform the navigation. Come down here. So we've got that listed there. I'm going to come up here and pound hyperlink 1. Set my position to absolute. I'll come down here and get my crosshairs, and I'm going to place it up in here. So now I've got my navigation to my second page there. Next, we're going to put our display box here. So for that, we're going to use a text box. I'll drag a text box in here. I'm going to change the ID of this one to be display. We'll leave it as run at server. Here we'll do a pound display. We're going to set that position to be absolute. We'll give it a width of 300 pixels, and we'll give it a height of 50 pixels. Once we've done that, we can come down here, we can select it, get our crosshairs, and we can just kind of position it where we want it for the time being. And now that brings us to our buttons. From the toolbox, we'll grab a button and drop it onto the screen. We are going to change the IDs. This is going to be BTN1, capital B, lowercase tn, the number 1. We'll put run at equals server, and we will change the text here to be the number 1. And that's how we'll leave it there. We'll come up here and do a pound BTN1. We'll set the position to be absolute. And then we're going to set the width and the height of the button to be 100 pixels each. And give it a font size of 24 point. When we click down here, you should see a pretty good size button there. So here we've got our button on the display here. We're going to create, well, we're creating 16 of these, but let's start with the numbers. So we'll start with 1, and we'll work our way through. My crosshairs. Leave room for another one down below it. So right there, I'm going to go ahead and do a Control-Shift-B and just make sure that everything is fine. It should be at this point. There we go. So this button 1, I'm going to select it, hit Control-C, click off of it, hit Control-V. It's going to paste it. You'll see up here we now have BTN1 and BTN2. I'm going to select it. You'll see that it had me select BTN1 there. And you will have to just keep them in order as you make them. Let's go ahead and change the text on this second one to be a 2. I'm going to grab the 2, hit a Control-C, click off of it, Control-V. I'm going to change the text up here to be a 3. Select that number 3. With that selected, I'm going to do a Control-C, click off of it, Control-V. I'm going to change this BTN4 up here to show text of 4. I'll grab that one and move it over. With that one selected, Control-C, Control-V. Again, I'm clicking off of it before I hit Control-V. There's number 5. So with it selected, Control-C, deselect it, Control-V. Change the value to a 6 on that one. With that selected, Control-C, deselect, Control-V. Change that value to a 7. Grab the 6 that time. With the 7 selected, I'm going to do a Control-C, deselect, Control-V, change it to an 8. You can also tell which one you've got selected in that top view. It highlights which one you have selected. Control-C, deselect, Control-V, change that to a 9. Control-C, deselect, Control-V, change that to a 0. And also change it to BTN 0. Notice it says 10 there because it was automatically generated. BTN 0. Oh, we also have to change this right here, our CSS. So we change the name of it. The ID of it down below, we have to change the ID of it up here in the CSS. And there's my 0. The 0, I'm going to pull it down here. And now we are ready for some of the other buttons. So if I stay in order of the code that I have, next we'll do the division. So I'll just take this 0, I'll do a Control C, deselect, Control V. I'm going to change the name of this one to btn div. The text I'm going to change to be a /. Since I changed the ID to be btn div, I've got to go up here to the CSS and change the latest one to be btn div. Each time it automatically creates one, it's going to add a number to whatever the one was that we copied was. So now that I've changed it here and the CSS, I'll come down here, I'll grab it, and it goes up in here. I'm going to grab with that one selected, I'll do a Control C, deselect, paste it. Notice it changed it to div0. I'm going to change that to btn mult. Change this to an asterisk. Scroll up to the CSS and change that to btn mult. And once I've done that, I can come down here If you don't have your grid on, you can always go to View, Ruler and Grid, Snap to Grid. That might help line up a little bit better. We showed that in another video. So I'm going to grab this one, Control C. Only a few more to go. This one's going to be subtract, so we'll do btn subtract. Change this to be a minus sign. Scroll up to our CSS and change that to be btn subtract. Come down here, and we've got that one selected, so we can pull it down. Control C, Control V. This one's going to be btn add. Do a plus sign here, scroll up to the CSS, btn add, back here, and move it into place. We need an equal sign and a clear, so I'm going to do the equal sign next. Control C, Control V. That one will be called btn equal. Change this to an equal sign. Scroll up to the CSS, btn equal. Come down to Design View, select it, move it into place. And then we need a clear, so I'll do a Control C, Control V. We'll change that latest one to be btn clear. We'll put a capital C as the text on it, and we'll scroll up to the CSS and make that btn clear. Come down here to Design View, grab the clear button, We'll put it up here above the divide button. And now I'm just going to move things around so that they fit a little bit better on the screen. So we'll scrunch things together a little bit better. Just using the arrow keys. So that's probably good enough for our purposes. Things are lined up fairly well. So we've got our title, we've got our link to our other page. I'm going to grab this and maybe move it to about there. We've got our 16 buttons and our display. Let's go ahead and do a Control-Shift-B for build. See one succeeded down there. And now we are ready to move into functionality. First, I'm going to get rid of these spaces just so that it fits on the screen better. So all my buttons I'm going to bring together. So at least they'll fit a little bit better on the screen and not have to scroll quite as much. None of them should have event handlers yet, and that's what we're going to be working on next. And we are going to work through them one by one. So we are going to start with, let's start with button 0. We'll go 0 through 9. So what I'm going to do is down here in the display view, I'm going to double click this button here. Now just do one. We'll do them one at a time as we go through. So I'll double click this one. That creates my event handler in the .cs code behind. Once we are in that event handler, what we want to do is set the text of display. Now you'll remember display is this one right here. So we'll do display dot text is equal to, let's start with something simple. Now let's do a Control-Shift-B. Succeeded. I'll come over here, right click, view in browser. So when that loads, the only one that we put an event handler on is the 0. So I'll click the 0, and it populates something into the display. But instead of saying that, we want it to say what is on the button itself. So we're going to do btn0.text.toString. So we're going to take the text off of that button and we're going to put it into the display. Once we've done that, we want to store the value that was chosen, right? So we need to store the first value, then store the operation, then store the second value, and then perform the operation with the two values. So we've got to save that value, which brings us to the session variable. So we're going to create our own function here. You'll notice that the other functions start with protected void. So we will do protected void. We're going to call it store display, so capital S, store display. It accepts a parameter of type string, and we're going to call it from display. and then we'll put open and close curly brackets. So this is a name we made up. We're going to store the display value. This is a name that we made up. This is a variable that we're passing in, and it is of type string. So that means it's text, right? So we're passing in the value from display. We're going to use the session, create a session variable called displayed value. And set that equal to from display .toString. So whatever we pass into this function is going to take it in string form and store it into this session variable as a string. So we are going to call store display, and we're going to pass it btn0.text.toString. So we will pass in the value off of that button. btn0.text is the value that's written on that button. If we come to btn0, text equals 0. So we are actually using the values that are on the button, and we're going to use those values to perform our mathematical operations. Now the rest of the other 9 buttons becomes repetitive, and what I want you to notice is that when you see something repetitive like what's about to happen, you should start asking yourself, how could I make this more efficient? Before we do another button, let's go ahead and do a Control-Shift-B, and then we will view this in the browser. Now button 0 is the only button that we have done, so we'll click 0, and we'll see that the value off of this button is taken and then put into this display. So now let's do 1 through 9. We'll do them one at a time. So I'm going to double click on 1, wait for it to take me to this code behind. Now don't get copy and paste happy, because you do have to make changes. We need these exact same 2 lines, except we need to change it from btn0 to btn1. Oops. Now don't get copy and paste happy and decide you're going to copy and paste this function. Don't do that. Go back to the .aspx and double click each one individually. There are things that happen within Visual Studio that you do not see in these files. So trying to take a shortcut or bypass something many times is not going to work. So for each one of these, we're going to create this function in the code behind. And you have to change it from btn0 to btn1. Let's go back to here, and we want to double click on 2. Let it generate this function in the .cs file. We will copy these 2, paste it, change btn1 to be btn2, and let's go ahead and do a Control-Shift-B, right click, view in browser. Now there's no functioning yet. All we're doing is taking the value off the button, putting it in the display. So let's go ahead and finish those out. We'll do 3. Make sure that you change it to use the proper number. We'll come back and do 4. Make that point to btn4. Come back and do 5. Make this point to btn5. 6. btn6. 7, btn 7, 8, 9, now let's make sure that each one of these, as we click on them, stores the value into display. So Control-Shift-B, over here, right-click, view in the browser, and all we're looking to do is see if the number changes like it should. 9, 8, 7, 4, 5, 6, 3, 2, 1, 0. So it's functioning as it should at this moment. Next, we're going to do the 4 operations. We'll start with add. So we're going to come here, double-click the add button. Now on this one, we are going to use the session again, and we're going to do session, and we'll call it operand 1, and we'll set that equal to session displayed value. So the displayed value, whatever was put into the display, we're going to, after the operation is clicked, we're going to store that into the operand. And then we're also going to set the operation to be the word add. So we're going to, this session value will change from add to subtract to multiply to divide. We'll have just the one session variable there. This operand 1 will get set inside of each one of these operation clicks. So come back here and let's do subtract. Again, we're setting operand 1 equal to the displayed value. We're setting the operation here to subtract. Let's come back and do multiply. We'll change the operation to multiply. Back to the ASPX, divide. Change the operation to divide. And now we are ready for the equal button. I'm going to go ahead and do a Control-Shift-B. At this point, if we were to view it in the browser, you would not see any difference from the last time we viewed it in the browser. So we will come back to our display and we're going to double-click the equal. When equal is clicked, we're going to create another session variable. We're going to call it operand 2, and we are going to pull the value that is now in displayed value and store it into operand 2. So we will have an operand 1 and an operand 2 in our if-else statement that we're about to write. So what we're going to do is write an if-else that checks for if we are doing an add, subtract, multiply, or divide. So we'll do an if. We'll say session operation dot toString is double equal to the hard-coded value of add. If that's true, we're going to just, for the time being, we're going to set the text to be the word add. We'll do an else if session operation dot toString is double equal to the word subtract. We'll set the text to be equal to the word subtract. Likewise, if the operation is multiply or divide, we'll set the text to be multiply or divide. And those four words there are about to be replaced. But we're going to do a Control-Shift-B. Now we'll come over and view in the browser. When it loads this time, when you click on hold on. Sorry, I didn't click the equal sign, did I? Let's go back because I closed that. Right click, view in the browser, and so now we can perform an operation, but when we click equals, it will say which operation that we clicked. So if I do like that, it should say which one I've clicked. So we need to actually finish the equals, and then we need to do the clear button. So as you saw, I tried clicking the clear out of habit there, and nothing happened because we haven't set an event handler for the clear button yet. So let's start with add. We're going to set display text equal to, in its simplest form, let's just start without using convert. Let's do session operand 1 dot toString plus session operand 2 dot toString. And let's just do it like that and watch what happens. Control-Shift-B. View it in the browser. So I'm going to do 8 plus 6 equals 86. So instead of doing a mathematical addition, it did a concatenation, because concatenation in C# is also the plus sign. So I need to change these into integers and then add them together. So what I'm going to do is put convert dot toInt32 open parenthesis, and after this toString right here, I'm going to put a closing parenthesis. In front of this session, I'm going to do convert toInt32 opening parenthesis, and after this toString here, I'm going to put a closing parenthesis. Now, that is enough to perform that mathematical operation, but the problem is we're taking the result of that and putting it into something that requires text. So I need to put a grouping. In the very front, I'm putting a parenthesis, and at the very end, I'm putting another parenthesis. So you'll see there's 3 closing parentheses there. Dot toString. So this will now group. You'll see it matches up over here. This will now group that entire thing and convert it back to a string. So we are converting this text into an integer and adding it to this text after it's converted to an integer, and then we are converting the entire thing back to a string. So let's do a Control-Shift-B. View in the browser. And let's do a 5 plus 2 equals, and we get 7. So again, convert to at 32 is taking the session operand 1.toString. It's a number, but it's stored as text, right? So it's converting that text into an actual integer so that we can perform a mathematical function. Same thing's happening over here. So then we wind up with number plus number, and we get the result. And then this grouping here, we're taking the whole thing, which is the result, and converting it back into a string so that it can be stored into display.text. So now we're going to do that again for subtract, multiply, and divide. So I'm just going to take this line and instead of adding here, we're going to subtract. Here we'll do an asterisk for multiply. Here we'll do a / for divide. So we're keeping operand 1 and operand 2 like in the order that they are. We don't have to change anything else about it, but we have our 4 operations happening there. So now you can go ahead and do a Control-Shift-B. Make sure that you don't have anything in that little piece that we did that is wrong. Let's go ahead and do the clear button. So we'll double click on the C. That gets us to button clear. We are going to clear everything. So display.text, we're going to set equal to the empty string, double quote, and then we've got 4 session variables that we're going to set equal to the empty string. So operation, set that equal to the empty string. Operand 1 and 2. And finally, displayed value. Do a Control-Shift-B to build. You should see 1 succeeded down there in your output window. Now we can come over here, right-click, view in the browser, and this one should work. So let's do an 8 divided by 4 equals, clear it. 7 times 3 equals, clear it. 5 minus 2 equals, clear it. 5 plus 9 equals, clear it. So that is your first part. And the second part that we're going to look at now is condensing it to use fewer functions, fewer event handlers on the back end. So in here, I'm going to come back to the solution and right-click, add new item. This is your best method to use. We'll add a new web form, and we'll call it calc2, calc2.aspx. Hit add. You'll see it get added over here in your solution. We're going to start by looking at just the ASPX for the moment. So let's make this ASPX look like the other one. Don't copy everything. Pay attention and copy the guts, but leave the rest. So I'm going to copy this div out of the form. It has all of our buttons in it. Once you copy it, don't click down in the display yet. Just copy it, and then we'll come back and we'll get the styles. So I'm going to copy this out of here. I'm going to make sure that it replaces this right here. Do not build or anything yet. Don't do anything like that. All of our styles that are here, I'm going to grab our styles and I'm going to paste them here inside of the head tag. Again, don't save or build yet. Everything is there. Come down here to your click events and let's erase all of them. So leave the text equals there, but we're getting rid of the on click equals. We're just going to get rid of those all the way down for all the buttons. We'll add them back in as we need them. So now we've got all of our buttons on the page. We're going to change this here from Calc 2 to Calc 1 because we are working on Calc 2. So Calc 1 and Calc 1. And we're going to change this here to V2. So this is our second version. There's our navigation back to our first version. Here's all of our buttons. And now that we've done that, we can do a split view, and we can do a Control-Shift-B, and we should have 1 succeeded and 0 failed. So it's not looking for anything in the .cs. That's why I said don't build it. We had to get rid of those on-click events, and so everything builds just fine. And now we can start looking at building the CS for this one, and it is going to be different from the CS that we did in this one here. So if we go ahead and open our .cs, you'll see it's blank back here. Let's start with number 1 because it's the top of our list here. So let's double click number 1. Number 1. And we get protected void button 1 click as our event handler, but we're going to change that, and we're going to change that name to btn clicked. So btn clicked. When we change it to btn clicked with capital B, capital C, we're going to go back to the ASPX, and where the on click is, we're going to change it there to btn clicked, like that. Then with this one selected, just for good measure, we're going to go to View, Properties window, hit the lightning bolt. We'll see the click event points to btn clicked, so that's good. So we've got btn clicked here, points to btn clicked here. When this button is clicked, it sends the button itself and any event arguments that it may have. Now for right now, we're worrying about the sender itself, which is a button. So what we are going to do is use that sender. So again, the sender itself is the button. It is, if you were to take this entire button right here and just pass it back to here, that's what you're getting. It comes in as a generic object, so what we have to do is cast it into a button. So we are changing the type from an object to a button. So first we need to declare a button. So to declare it, we'll do system.web.ui.webcontrols.button. And we'll call it, this is a name that I'm making up, myBTN. So that's my variable name, my object name, myBTN. And then I'm going to say myBTN is equal to and I'm going to cast the sender. So it's equal to the, I can't just say that it's equal to the sender. That doesn't work because my BTN is a button and sender is an object. So what I have to do is convert object sender into button sender. So all I do is just again type in parentheses there system.web.ui.webcontrols.button, and that line there will cast or convert sender into a button and store it into the variable that I made, the object that I made, my BTN. Once we've done that, we've got the same functionality. We're looking at the same functionality that we did in the other calc example. So we'll do display.text is equal to, now for starters, let's do this, Control-Shift-B, one succeeded. So when I click the number 1, I should get hello world. I'll go ahead and I'll always start with Calc 1 so that I can go to Calc 2. When I click on the number 1, I get hello world. But instead of it saying hello world, we want it to say the value that's on the button. So my btn.text.toString. Now you'll remember that in the other one it was btn1.text.toString, and then we had a separate event handler for btn2 and btn3. What we are doing here is condensing those 10 number buttons down into just 10 number button event handlers down into just one event handler. After that, we need our store display, and it is a little bit different. Not a lot, but we'll do protected void store display. It accepts a parameter of type string called from display. Oops. There we go, curly brackets. We're going to set session. This time we're going to call it operand. It could be either the first or the second, so we've created this one called operand from display dot toString. So it's going to store an operand temporarily until we get it into either operand 1 or operand 2. So down here we call store display and we pass it my btn.text.toString. Now the only one that we have pointing to this is the number 1. So I'm going to do a Control-Shift-B. Always do a little build and test. Don't try to complete the whole thing and then you wind up with errors and you don't know where they are because you did so much. So I switch to Calc 2, V2, I click on the number 1, and there's my number 1. So now that I've created this button clicked event handler, I'm going to go back to calc2.aspx. And this onClick event, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste it for all the numbers, only the numbers. So there's 1 through 9 and 0, Control-Shift-B, build succeeded. I'm going to view it in the browser. And now again, whatever button you click on, it should take the text off of that button and put it in the display. So now that we've done that, we need to get the operation. So let's choose one of the operations. I'm going to double click on the plus sign. So we've got btn add click. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to change this to, we're going to get rid of that name entirely. We're going to call it operation clicked. So which operation was clicked? Operation clicked. When we do that, we have to go back to Calc 2, and we have to change this onClick event to be identical. Operation clicked. So that it matches here, and it matches here. So it's the same spelling, same capitalization and everything. For good measure, we can go to View, Properties window, make sure we've got that selected. Click on the lightning bolt. The click event points to operation clicked. Control-Shift-B. It finds it just fine. So now we can come back to operation clicked. And the first thing we're going to do in there is set session operand 1 equal to the generic, or the, whoops, equal to the operand that was stored initially. So we're going to take that value that was stored up here, we're going to put it into operand 1. And that'll be our first operand. But then after that, we're doing the same thing that we did right above. We're going to create MyBTN again. So it's system.web.ui.webcontrols.button MyBTN. I can create it using the same name because the scope is only this function. So I declared it inside of this function btn clicked, which means it only exists inside of this function btn clicked. That's why down here in operation clicked, I can use the exact same name, because the scope of it is only this function. Then we can do MyBTN equals, and again, we're going to set it equal to the sender, but we have to cast the sender into a button. Again, the sender is that button, but it comes in as a generic object, and we can't just say MyButton equals sender, because MyButton is a button and sender is an object. So we have to cast it, or change the type, so that the program knows, hey, we do actually want to do this. We want to convert sender into a button so that we can use it. So we are casting it into that button. And then after that, we'll do session operation is equal to mybtn.text.toString. So we'll store the operation there. So now we have operand 1 and the operation. The next time a button is clicked, it will go back into session operand, and then we'll click the equal sign after that. But first, the only one that we've handled here is the plus sign. So we're going to do a Control-Shift-B, make sure we don't have any issues there. We'll come back to calc2.aspx. This onClick event here we're going to copy, and we put this on all 4 of the operations. There's divide, there's multiply, there's subtract. Do a Control-Shift-B, everything should work. Now, if we were to load this and view this, you wouldn't see anything different than what we saw last time. So let's go ahead and move to the equal sign. Come here and double-click equal. We will leave the name of it the same. The first thing we're going to do is set session operand 2 equal to the operand, the other operand that was set in store display. Once we've done that, we have session operand 1 and session operand 2, and the rest of that if-else is actually the same as what is in Calc 1. So if I go to calc1.aspx.cs and I grab this if-else and make sure that you get all of those lines, and I copy that and I come back to Calc 2 and I paste that in. I'm going to go ahead and close Calc 1 because I don't need it. So now I'm setting operand 2 here using the operand from store display, and the same thing here, that we've got the plus, the minus, the multiply, divide, but we do have to change this because operation no longer equals a word that we set. If you look at calc1.aspx.cs, we set it equal to the word, but now what we are doing is grabbing the text off of the button itself, which means that it's a symbol. So this would be a plus sign, this would be a minus sign, this would be an asterisk, and this would be a forward slash. So you have to change those 4 items there. Control-Shift-B. So that will take care of the equal sign, and before we test it, let's go ahead and take care of the clear, because all we're doing is setting some values equal to the empty string. So I'll come here, double click the C, there's our button clear, we'll leave it named that. We're going to do display.text is equal to the empty string, session operation is equal to the empty string, session operand is equal to the empty string, session operand 1 is equal to the empty string, and session operand 2 is equal to the empty string. So that will clear everything out. Control-Shift-B. See that everything built fine there. And then we'll come over here. We will make sure you choose the ASPX. Right-click, View in Browser. So we'll check version 1 again. So version 1, 8 divided by 4 equals clear. 7 times 6 equals clear. 5 minus 3 equals clear. 2 plus 1 equals clear. Go to Calc 2 and we'll do 8 divided by 4 equals clear it. 9 times 7 equals clear. 6 minus 5 equals clear. 3 plus 2 equals clear. And so we have our fully functioning calculator, both versions. So again, the highlights of this are condensing down all of those event handlers. We had 10 event handlers that we condensed down into one. We did that by taking object sender and casting it into a type button so that we could get the value off of the button and use it. We did the same thing with operations. There were 4 of those. We condensed 4 down into 1, and then we used object sender and we cast it into type button so that we could get the value of the text that is written on the button. We would then use the value of the text to perform our operations. So for a number, we converted it into an integer to perform the operation. And then for an operation, we used that sign to determine which operation we were going to perform. We also use the session object in both versions. So storing values into a session variable so that we can continue to use it after each post back or round trip to the server. And that gets us through looking at assignment 3 and everything that was involved with creating it.